A magnitude 7. One earthquake tore through southern Japan on Tuesday, and what it left behind is the kind of devastation that stops everything. Buildings collapsed, roads buckled, a shopping mall exploded and partially came down with people still inside. A tsunami warning sent hundreds of thousands of coastal residents scrambling for higher ground. And rescue crews are right now working through twisted steel and fallen concrete in a race against time that nobody knows the outcome of yet. This is Kumamoto, Kyushu Island, and this region has been through this before, but that history does not make what is happening today any easier to comprehend. Let us go through everything we know in the order that it matters, because this story is still developing in real time on July the 29th, 2026, and every hour is producing new information about the scope of what has hit southern Japan. The earthquake struck at approximately 4:27 in the afternoon local time. That specific timing matters, and we will come back to why. The epicenter sat roughly 12 miles south of Kumamoto City, a major urban center in central Kyushu, with a population approaching 700,000 people. The depth of the quake was just over 10 kilometers, shallow, and in seismology, shallow is a word that carries enormous consequences. When an earthquake occurs at depth, the energy it releases has time and distance to spread and dissipate before it reaches the surface. A shallow quake delivers that energy with far less attenuation. The destructive force arrives at the surface more concentrated, more violent, more capable of destroying the kind of infrastructure that modern cities depend on. At 10 kilometers depth, this was as close to a direct surface strike as a major earthquake gets. Japan's seismic intensity scale, the Shindo system, registered this tremor at Shindo 7 in parts of Kumamoto Prefecture. Shindo 7 is the maximum rating on that scale. It is not a warning level or an elevated caution. It is the highest number on the instrument. It means violent shaking capable of toppling heavy furniture and appliances, cracking reinforced concrete structures, and causing catastrophic damage to buildings that are not built to the most demanding earthquake-resistant standards. Neighboring prefectures felt it. Nagasaki, Kagoshima, Fukuoka, Saga, and Miyazaki all reported strong shaking. The geographic footprint of this earthquake extended far beyond the epicenter area, touching communities across a significant portion of Kyushu Island. But the most severe consequences were concentrated in the Kumamoto region, which found itself at the center of the worst of it, now the mall. This is the detail that crystallized the human reality of what was happening in Kumamoto on Tuesday afternoon. At an Aeon shopping mall in the town of Kushima, an explosion tore through the second floor of the building in the immediate aftermath of the earthquake. The explosion was followed by a partial structural collapse. Firefighters responding to the scene found thick, white smoke rising from the wreckage, fallen debris blocking access to interior areas, and a large number of people, shoppers and employees, trapped inside. Local broadcasters reported that between 20 and 30 mall employees could not be reached in the hours immediately following the quake. Their locations were unknown. Their condition was unknown. Rescue crews were working through the wreckage, trying to establish contact and extract survivors. At least one death has been confirmed connected to this location alone, and authorities have explicitly warned that the toll from the mall could rise further as the search operation continues. The afternoon timing is significant in exactly the way you might expect. At 4:27 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, a shopping mall in a city region of 700,000 people is not empty. It is busy. Parents shopping after school pickup, workers on late afternoon errands, employees in the middle of their work shifts. The combination of a heavily occupied commercial building, an explosion that damaged the structure's integrity, and a partial collapse created one of the most complex and dangerous search and rescue scenarios in the entire disaster. Away from the mall, at a paper factory in the city of Yatsushiro, a tall industrial chimney collapsed during the shaking. Several workers at the facility remain unaccounted for. The company has been unable to make contact with a portion of its staff since the quake struck. Rescue teams have been dispatched to assess the damage and search for survivors, but industrial sites create their own complications for search and rescue operations, with heavy machinery, chemical hazards, and structural configurations that differ significantly from residential or commercial building collapses. Across Kumamoto Prefecture, at least 12 buildings collapsed. 4 of those sites were confirmed to still have people trapped inside during active parts of the rescue response. Emergency crews are working multiple sites simultaneously, which means resources are being allocated across a distributed disaster landscape rather than concentrated at a single location. The infrastructure damage extends far beyond the buildings. A major highway bridge buckled under the force of the earthquake. The main Kumamoto Expressway sustained damage significant enough to disrupt regional transport across the area. In the immediate aftermath of a major earthquake, road damage of this kind has compounding consequences. Rescue vehicles cannot reach affected areas as quickly. Supplies cannot move efficiently. Evacuation routes are compromised. The logistical chain that connects emergency response to the people who need it most is disrupted precisely when the need is greatest. Bullet train services across the affected region were suspended as engineers inspected the tracks for structural integrity and safety. Shinkansen infrastructure is engineered to the highest standards in the world, but the decision to suspend service was correct because running high-speed rail on tracks that have not been inspected following a Shindo 7 earthquake is not a risk that any responsible operator accepts. Passengers crowded platforms at nearby stations, waiting for updates that could not yet be provided because the inspection process was still underway. 2 hospitals in the disaster zone reported receiving at least 50 injured patients each within hours of the earthquake. Read that number carefully. At least 50 patients at each of 2 hospitals within hours of the event. That is a minimum of 100 serious injury cases flowing into medical facilities that were themselves affected by the quake. Hospital staff described a steady stream of ambulances arriving, with people suffering burns and fractures, many of them hurt while trapped beneath fallen objects or debris. One hospital employee stated that the facility was dealing with water leaks and electrical failures, even as medical staff tried to treat the stream of incoming patients. A nursing home for elderly residents reported around 10 injuries among residents and staff. The specific vulnerability of elderly residents in disaster scenarios is well understood. Limited mobility, greater susceptibility to injury from falls, difficulty self-evacuating, and higher medical complexity, once injured all, combined to make earthquake impacts on care facilities a particular concern for emergency responders. Within minutes of the earthquake, a tsunami advisory was issued for the Ariake and Yatsushiro seas. Coastal residents in those areas were instructed to move immediately to higher ground. The advisory created an additional layer of chaos in an already overwhelmed region, with residents attempting to both shelter from aftershocks and evacuate coastal zones simultaneously. The advisory was lifted a short time later after monitoring stations detected no significant wave activity at sea. But the window between the advisory being issued and the all-clear being given was a period of genuine fear for coastal communities that were simultaneously dealing with earthquake damage and trying to move people away from shorelines. The psychological toll of a tsunami warning alone, even one that does not materialize into an actual wave event, is not trivial. Japan's nuclear regulator confirmed that the nearby Sendai nuclear power plant sustained no damage and continues to operate safely. This was one of the most critically important statements issued in the immediate aftermath of the earthquake, and it reflects lessons absorbed with enormous difficulty from the 2011 disaster at Fukushima. Japanese nuclear safety protocols have been significantly enhanced since 2011, and the confirmation of Sendai's operational safety came quickly and clearly, which matters enormously for public confidence in a moment of acute crisis. Roughly 300,000 residents across Kumamoto Prefecture have been instructed by local officials to seek shelter at designated evacuation centers as authorities continue assessing which structures remain safe for habitation. 300,000 people displaced from their homes or instructed not to return to potentially compromised buildings, filling evacuation centers, requiring food, water, shelter, medical care, and the kind of sustained logistical support that disaster response systems are designed to provide. But that is always tested severely by an event of this scale. Widespread power outages and water service disruptions have been reported across affected communities. Convenience stores, which serve a function in Japanese daily life that goes beyond simple retail, providing ready meals, household essentials, and community touchpoints, saw shelves emptying within hours of the earthquake, as residents prepared for the possibility of extended disruption. Panic buying in the immediate aftermath of a major disaster is a documented and predictable human response, but it creates secondary distribution problems that compound the primary challenge of getting supplies to people who need them. Japan's prime minister addressed the nation following the earthquake, confirming human casualties, building collapses, road damage, and fires across the affected zone, while cautioning that the full scope of the damage and the final casualty count remain unclear at this stage. The measured tone of that statement reflects the standard of official communication that Japan has developed through hard experience with major disasters, providing confirmed facts without speculation and acknowledging uncertainty without creating additional panic. The Defense Ministry mobilized approximately 3,600 military personnel for disaster relief, supported by 20 aircraft tasked with surveying the damage from above. Military involvement in Japanese disaster response has been a cornerstone of the country's emergency management framework since the 1995 Great Hanshin earthquake, which killed more than 6,000 people and exposed significant gaps in the civilian response capacity of the era. The Self-Defense Force's role in domestic disaster response has been refined continuously since then, and their deployment within hours of a major earthquake reflects a readiness posture that has been built and maintained across 3 decades of lessons learned. Multiple fires broke out across Kumamoto Prefecture in the aftermath of the shaking. Post-earthquake fires are a recognized secondary hazard that can, in some circumstances, cause more damage than the initial shaking. The 1923 Great Kanto earthquake, which struck Tokyo, is the most extreme historical example. Fires that ignited in the aftermath of the earthquake devastated areas that the shaking itself had left relatively intact. Modern fire suppression infrastructure and building materials have significantly reduced this risk, but fires following major earthquakes remain a serious concern that emergency responders address as a distinct threat category alongside structural search and rescue. Kumamoto Castle, one of Japan's most historically significant landmarks and a symbol of the region's identity, sustained damage. This is not the first time the castle has been hit. In the 2016 earthquake sequence, sections of the castle's ancient stone walls collapsed, and restoration work that was still ongoing when Tuesday's earthquake struck was interrupted once again. The human casualties and the infrastructure damage are the overwhelming priority in this moment, but the cultural wound of watching a landmark of this significance sustain repeated damage speaks to something about what this region has endured. Now, the context that makes this disaster comprehensible within Japan's broader seismic reality. Japan sits at the convergence of multiple tectonic plates on the Pacific Ring of Fire. The Pacific Plate, the Philippine Plate, the Eurasian Plate, and the North American Plate all interact beneath and around the Japanese archipelago. The energy produced by those plate interactions has no parallel in any other comparably developed nation on Earth. Japan experiences nearly 20% of all earthquakes measuring magnitude 6 or higher anywhere on the planet. This is not an exceptional event in the statistical sense. It is a manifestation of the geological reality that Japan has always inhabited and has built its civilization around managing. The 2016 Kumamoto earthquake sequence is the most relevant immediate precedent. That disaster began with a magnitude 6, 2 foreshock that caused significant damage, followed 2 days later by a magnitude 7, 0 main shock that struck in the middle of the night. The sequence ultimately killed close to 275 people, injured thousands more, and damaged more than 200,000 homes. Economic losses were estimated at several trillion yen, making it one of the costliest natural disasters in modern Japanese history. The region had not fully recovered from that event before Tuesday's earthquake struck. Some of the infrastructure damage visible today in Kumamoto reflects wounds from 2016 that were in various stages of repair. And Kumamoto Castle, as noted, was still undergoing restoration from the 2016 damage. Since the catastrophic magnitude, undenied earthquake and tsunami of March 2011, which triggered the Fukushima nuclear disaster and killed approximately 20,000 people, Japan has invested massively in earthquake early warning systems, building code enforcement, tsunami, barrier infrastructure, and emergency response capacity. Those investments are credited with limiting casualties in Tuesday's disaster relative to what the shaking intensity alone might otherwise have produced. The early warning system, which detects the initial P waves of an earthquake and sends alerts to mobile phones and public broadcasting systems, seconds before the more destructive S waves arrive, provides a brief but sometimes life-saving window for people to take protective action. Those seconds matter. In a Shindo 7 event, the difference between being caught standing at a desk and being crouched under a reinforced surface can determine whether someone survives a ceiling collapse or is killed by it. Seismologists are now watching closely for aftershocks. The Kumamoto region has already experienced tremors measured at magnitude 5, 6, and 4, 9 in the hours after the main shock. In the 2016 event, the sequence of major aftershocks following the initial earthquakes caused additional building collapses, trapped people who had already been rescued and returned to damaged structures, and created ongoing danger for rescue personnel working in buildings that had been partially compromised by earlier shaking. Authorities have explicitly instructed residents not to return to damaged buildings until structural inspections are complete. But in practice, this is difficult to enforce completely. People want to retrieve belongings. They want to assess the condition of their homes. They want to return to familiar surroundings after the disorientation of a major disaster. The instruction to stay away from compromised structures until they have been professionally inspected is driven by a real and documented risk that aftershocks will bring down buildings that survive the initial shaking in a weakened state. At the collapsed mall and the damaged paper factory, rescue operations are expected to continue around the clock. The decision to maintain around-the-clock operations reflects an assessment that there are likely still survivors in the wreckage of both sites. Search and rescue doctrine establishes survivability windows that vary based on the nature of the collapse, the environmental conditions, and the severity of injuries sustained. The first 72 hours following a structural collapse are the period in which the probability of finding survivors in air pockets within the debris is highest. Every hour within that window that rescue operations continue without interruption increases the probability of finding someone alive. International reaction came swiftly. Multiple governments and disaster relief organizations offered assistance in the hours following the earthquake. Japan has historically been selective in accepting international disaster assistance, preferring in most circumstances to manage major events with domestic resources, given the scale and sophistication of its own emergency management capacity. But the scale of Tuesday's event, affecting a large urban region across multiple infrastructure sectors simultaneously, may result in acceptance of international support that previous events have not required. Insurance and reinsurance markets are watching this event carefully. Commercial damage in a dense urban area from a Shindo 7 earthquake, combined with the mall explosion and collapse, the industrial chimney collapse at the paper factory, the highway bridge damage, and widespread residential structural damage, represents a significant insured loss event by any actuarial measure. With aftershock still occurring and damage assessments still being compiled across an area of substantial geographic extent, the full financial toll will take days or weeks to calculate. But the numbers, when they come, will be secondary to the question that matters most right now. The people still unaccounted for at the mall, the workers who could not be reached at the paper factory, the residents in the 300,000 person evacuation population who are spending tonight in an emergency shelter rather than in their homes, the injured in the hospitals that are simultaneously treating patients and managing their own earthquake damage. Japan has faced this before. It has survived worse in terms of raw casualties. It has rebuilt from disasters that would have broken nations with less institutional resilience, less engineering sophistication, less collective understanding of what it means to live on the most seismically active archipelago on Earth. But none of that institutional resilience eliminates the individual weight of what Tuesday afternoon produced in Kumamoto. People who went to a shopping mall in the afternoon and did not come out. Workers who went to a factory for a Tuesday shift and whose families are waiting for any news. Hundreds of thousands of people whose homes may or may not be standing safely when the inspection process concludes. The rescue operations are running. The military personnel are deployed. The evacuation centers are receiving the displaced. The investigation of structural damages proceeding as rapidly as conditions allow. And on the rubble of the Aeon Mall in Kushima, crews are still working, still listening, still looking. Because until every space within that wreckage has been searched, the possibility that someone is still waiting to be found remains real. That is where this stands right now, July 29th, 2026, Kumamoto, Japan. And the next few hours matter more than anything else in this story.